This is the National Broadcasting Company.
Hey everyone, I'm Simone, and tonight on Signal, Israel's President Bibi Netanyahu has been indicted on multiple counts of corruption. What that means for Kushner's peace plan. Why tsunamis are so deadly in Indonesia despite their early warning system. And are you feeling the burn? We break down why 2020 is looking a lot different than 2016 for the Vermont senator. But first, former Trump personal attorney and self-described fixer Michael Cohen wrapped up his third day of testimony today. And according to his attorney, Lanny Davis, he'll be back in front of the House Intel Committee next Wednesday. Now, today's closed-door session was almost 8 hours long, but he's coming back for more because he says there's a lot more to discuss. Some of what the Intel Committee was looking into today was based on Cohen's public testimony yesterday, where Cohen hit a wide range of topics, including bringing a check he says was the president's reimbursement for paying off Stormy Daniels. And throughout yesterday's marathon hearing, Cohen referenced Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg, saying he's the guy with firsthand knowledge of alleged financial irregularities. Now we're learning that the House Intel Committee is going to call Weisselberg to testify too. So what's next for all the players? Well, Manafort is due to be sentenced next week. Flynn has a status report hearing the following week that will indicate if he is ready to move forward with his sentencing, as does Roger Stone. And remember Rick Gates, the former Manafort associate? Well, we may get more details soon on the status of his sentencing. And for this week's Star Witness, we're bringing in NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos to give us the play-by-play of his next steps.
Thanks, Simone. Former Trump lawyer Michael Cohen testified just 2 months before he reports for a 3-year federal sentence. A lot of other folks have been charged, and some have been sentenced in this Trump circle. So the question is, where do they go from here? Once an offender is sentenced in the federal system, they essentially become the cargo of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, or the BOP. The BOP has a central designation facility in Grand Prairie, Texas, called the DSCC. They handle all of the defendants after they are sentenced and figure out where they're going to place them. Michael Cohen is the quintessential New York guy, so he's probably going to be released after his sentence in New York State. That's why the Bureau of Prisons policy is to try to place offenders within 500 miles of where they're going to live after prison. For Michael Cohen, that would be New York. Michael Cohen is apparently requested to be placed at Otisville. That's a medium security facility, but with an adjacent minimum security camp. Some of the factors that might get him to Otisville: his crimes are nonviolent, and he's a first-time offender with a very short, relatively speaking, prison sentence. The BOP will try to separate defendants who have testified against co-defendants. But Cohen has not testified against Manafort, Flynn, or Gates. He has, however, in his congressional testimony, at least implicated Roger Stone in some dubious conduct. We have a question mark over Roger Stone because he hasn't been convicted of anything yet. So if Roger Stone is convicted, it's likely that the BOP would try to find a reason to not place him with Cohen. In addition, Roger Stone is a native Floridian. So, with the BOP policy of placement within 500 miles of home, Roger Stone is likely to end up closer to Florida. Mueller's probe is still not concluded, but as of this date, these are some of the characters that have been charged and some of them that have been convicted. And ultimately, what all of them may find is that the Bureau of Prisons now has control over any convicted person's life in a way that they've never expected before.
Very insightful. Thank you so much, Danny. Well, President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un broke off their summit in Hanoi, and it was a pretty abrupt ending. They couldn't come to an agreement about dismantling Pyongyang's nuclear weapons. NBC's chief White House correspondent Hallie Jackson was in Hanoi as this all went down. Hallie.
Hey there, Simone. President Trump is on his way back to Washington as we speak. But I'll tell you what, he flew halfway around the world here to Vietnam. and he's heading home empty-handed. That's because he and Kim Jong-un could not come up with a deal on denuclearization. So what was the sticking point? It's a fair question to ask. And according to the U.S., the sticking point was sanctions, okay? North Korea wanted sanctions lifted on them, but the U.S. felt like they just weren't giving up enough in exchange, enough inspections, for example, enough ways to move towards a complete and verifiable denuclearization. So where does that leave talks here as it relates to North Korea's nuclear program? The answer is stalled. They're not really going anywhere. The president did not commit to a third summit with Kim Jong-un. You have experts wondering, hey, why would he even consider a third summit given how the second one ended in this very sudden, abrupt manner? This lunch was called off. This signing ceremony that had been scheduled was called off as well, as both leaders kind of went their separate ways. At this point, the president said that he may meet again with Kim, but it may be a very long time before that happens. So lots to watch as the president makes his way back home. And we're keeping an eye on all of it. Simone, back to you.
Thank you so much, Hallie. Well, there's been a lot of talk about America's support for Israel lately, and there's some major news from Israel today that could shift the narrative. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will be indicted on charges of bribery and fraud. Now, the most serious allegations against him are based on his relationship with Israel's telecom giant, Bezeq. Police say Netanyahu promoted regulatory changes worth hundreds of millions of dollars to the company, and then in exchange, they'd give him good press on their news site. Police have recommended indicting Netanyahu before on charges in other cases, but this is big because it's the first time in Israeli history that a sitting prime minister has been charged with a crime. So Netanyahu responded earlier today saying he's the victim of a political witch hunt, that he plans to remain prime minister for many years, and that the timing of the intended indictment is suspicious because it's coming right before elections in April. And this all has implications beyond just internal Israeli politics. I mean, the indictment presents a massive problem for the Trump administration, which is very much pro-Netanyahu, and the feeling is mutual.
Mr. President, I've been here for nearly 4 decades with seeking to build the American-Israel alliance. Under your leadership, it's never been stronger. And Mr. President, I just want to say thank you for your leadership and thank you for your tremendous friendship. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And it has the potential to make Jared Kushner's job much more difficult. He's the president's son-in-law who's been assigned to handle America's plan for peace in the Middle East. Now, Kushner is over there right now in the Middle East trying to get regional support for the peace plan from the likes of Turkey and Saudi Arabia. The Trump administration has been counting on its close relationship with Netanyahu to bring Israelis to the table for talks, particularly right-wing Israelis who are aligned with Netanyahu but resistant to Palestinian statehood. And Kushner's team has delayed the unveiling of its peace plan several times now, hoping to wait for the right moment when things were politically more stable. And the current plan is now to wait until after the Israeli elections on April 19th. But today's turn of events make things even more unstable. So not only is it more uncertain that Netanyahu will secure another term, but the Trump-led peace plan, whatever that might look like, is also in jeopardy. One thing that is certain, at least for now, is that Trump is still standing by his man.
I can say this, that he's done a great job as prime minister. He's tough, he's smart, he's strong.
All right, now back at home, Trump has a lot of people running against him already in 2020. We've been bringing you updates on who's jumping into the race, and it looks like we're getting close to some more news. Former Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke has been saying he'd make up his mind by the end of February. That happens to be today. And he released a statement saying he and his wife, quote, have made a decision about how they can best serve our country and are excited to share it with everyone soon. So basically, he's announced that he will make an announcement. Still, people are reading those tea leaves and thinking that it sounds like he is, in fact, going to run. Now, this would be another big name in the already big mix of Democrats hoping to challenge the president. So this is why we're bringing in Steve Kornacki to talk us through the field and what to make of the polls thus far.
All right, so one of the big questions about the Democratic race in 2020, it's now been answered. Bernie Sanders came in second place in 2016. Yes, he is going to run again in 2020. And so the question is, can he actually win the Democratic nomination in 2020? Remember, take a look back, Sanders versus Clinton. You see in light blue here all of the states he won. So, of course, the question for Bernie Sanders 2020 is, can he build on what he started in 2016? How much of that support that he got, how much of that was support for him as opposed to people just voting against Hillary Clinton? Where does the race start right now? Where does Bernie Sanders poll right now? You can see here, if you average together all the polls that are out there, he's basically in second place on the Democratic side, right around, high teens, around 20% right now. The only one who's beating him right now, Joe Biden. We don't know yet if Joe Biden's actually going to run. What he's trying to pull off here is something we've seen actually a number of times in the last generation or so in American politics. It's the person who comes in second place, the runner-up in one nomination contest, turning around and saying, okay, I came close, and I'm going to try to build on it and win the next time around. This is something we really saw, particularly in modern times. We've seen this on the Republican side a lot. Ronald Reagan came in second place to Gerald Ford in 1976, ran again 1980, won the nomination, won the presidency. John McCain, second place in 2000, next open Republican nomination, he wins it in 2008. Romney goes from second in 08 to winning it in 12. We've seen that a lot on the Republican side, and we did, for the first time in modern times, see it on the Democratic side last time around. Hillary Clinton, remember, second place to Obama in 2008. She emerges as the big frontrunner in 2016, and of course, Bernie Sanders comes in second to her. So he's looking to join this group of candidates. In the past that we've seen, the question is, what position were they in when they launched their second campaign, when they launched their follow-up bid? We can take you through and show you. Reagan, we mentioned, 76 second place. When he launched his 1980 campaign, he was running at 41%. He entered as clearly the front runner, clearly the guy to beat in 1980, and he did win the nomination. When you go look at Bob Dole, here's another example, a little more recent, 1996, when he got in that race, he was clearly the front runner. First place, 51%, and of course did go on to win the nomination. We mentioned Hillary Clinton. When Hillary Clinton got in the race, got in the Democratic race, she was running at 75%. These folks who've made it work in the past started out in a more commanding position than Bernie Sanders is starting out in 2020. But I got to tell you, there have been others who've tried this who've fallen completely flat on their face. 2012, Mitt Romney was the Republican nominee for president in 2012. Who was second place against Romney? Rick Santorum. Rick Santorum ended up coming in second place. He looked at that. He said, hey, I came close. I'm going to run again in 2016. First poll out of the gate, he was running in 11th place. In our own poll, NBC poll, he wasn't even registering. And so you can see Bernie Sanders starting out certainly better than Rick Santorum, not on the same level as some of those others who pulled it off before. We will see what the polls bring in the near future for him and how this race unfolds.
Thanks so much, Steve. All right, now on to some of today's headlines briefly. There's been a lot of talk about another contentious moment from the Cohen hearing yesterday, but it didn't even really have anything to do with Cohen. Congressman Mark Meadows tried to fight Cohen's claims that the president is racist by bringing out a longtime Trump Organization employee and current government appointee who is black. And then Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib of Michigan responded.
There is no way that she would work for an individual who was racist.
Just because someone has a person of color, a black person working for them, does not mean they aren't racist. And it is insensitive that some would even say it's the fact that someone would actually use a prop, a black woman, in this chamber, in this committee, is alone racist in itself.
So that right there, that didn't sit well with Meadows, who requested Tlaib's comments be stricken from the record. But Meadows is taking more heat today as videos resurfaced that appear to show him promoting the Obama birther conspiracy.
What we're going to do is take back our country. 2012 is the time that we're going to send Mr. Obama home to Kenya or wherever it is. We're going to do it.
Now, as far as his spat with Rashida Tlaib, the two met again today on the House floor, and they hugged it out. Meadows says they shared a very good moment, and he wanted her to know there is no animosity or hard feelings at all. Okay, if you thought you might get a break from news about politicians in Virginia, well, think again. The state's First Lady, Pam Northam, has apologized for an incident where she handed out cotton to black children during a recent tour of the governor's mansion and asked them to imagine picking the crop if they had been slaves. Now, this, of course, comes after her husband, Governor Ralph Northam, was caught in a scandal of his own because of a racist photo in his old yearbook. He's resisted calls to resign, saying instead that he wants to, quote, heal the state. Now, in her apology for her interaction with the students, Pam Northam said she regrets upsetting anyone and is committed to chronicling the important history of the governor's mansion and will continue to engage historians and experts on the best way to do so. And baseball player Bryce Harper, widely regarded as the most prized free agent, ever, has agreed to a record-breaking 13-year, $330 million deal with the Philadelphia Phillies. The 26-year-old Harper is leaving the Washington Nationals for their rivals in the National League East. He's the third slugger in baseball to sign a $300 million contract, and he's been a big deal for quite some time now, having been at the center of a lot of hype since he was just a teenager. Harper actually left high school with a GED after just 2 years, and in 2009, Sports Illustrated put him on the cover, calling him the chosen one and the LeBron James of baseball. And those are your headlines. Briefly, we'll be right back in 30 seconds.
We are going to start with something different tonight. This is one of those things that you have not been otherwise hearing about in the news, but stick with me.
Feed your mind with fresh perspective. Get your favorite MSNBC shows now as podcasts.
The topics we cover on MSNBC every day, they're driven by big ideas, big themes, huge societal changes. And that's what we talk about on our new podcast. It's called Why Is This Happening?
Why Is This Happening with Chris Hayes. New episodes every Tuesday.
There's been so much news that's happened lately, it's easy to forget this, but it's only been a little over 2 months since Indonesia was hit by a massive tsunami that killed more than 400 people. The tsunami came as a surprise, even though the country has a warning system. Sarah Harmon from NBC's London bureau spent some time trying to figure out why.
Indonesia has a problem. Tsunamis. The last one, just 3 days before Christmas, killed more than 400 people. Fifi tells me she's only alive because she and her 7-year-old son just happened to be awake when the wave hit.
And we ran all the way up the field. Yes.
Her father-in-law survived with a head injury and a broken leg. I'm no doctor, but that leg looks pretty infected. The thing is, stories like theirs aren't all that rare here. Indonesia sits on the Ring of Fire. It's a hotbed of volcanic and seismic activity. It's basically a magnet for tsunamis. And each one is a tragedy, don't get me wrong, but it does have an element of routine to it by now. And they have an early warning system, but Indonesians keep dying. After days of talking with people who'd been completely blindsided, I started to wonder, why aren't they better at getting people out of harm's way? This is the Jakarta office where they try to spot tsunamis before they hit. There's a network of tidal gauges, buoys, seismographs, and sirens. This model shows how it works, at least in theory. All of the info flows through this control room.
Hi, I'm Sarah. Nice to meet you. Hi, nice to meet you too.
Winnie's team is here 24/7, 7 days a week, watching.
Because we don't know when the earthquake occurred, and we don't know still when the tsunami will come. When the earthquake occurred, there is a blink of the sensor of the location of the source.
The team then has 5 minutes to analyze the data. If they think a tsunami is likely, they pass it on to regional authorities. They're the ones who make the call about whether to put out a tsunami warning. The system isn't perfect. The buoys haven't worked in years. The communication towers that send the alerts often get destroyed by the initial impact. Perhaps most critically, all of this equipment can only monitor for one kind of tsunami.
So there's volcanic earthquakes? Yes, volcanic earthquakes. And there are seismic earthquakes? Right, yes. Are you tracking volcanic earthquakes here? Not really.
And that's a problem. Because although most tsunamis are generated by earthquakes, The rest can be caused by pretty much anything that displaces a massive amount of water. Volcanic eruptions, underwater landslides, even, in theory, meteorites. Which means that even on a perfect day, Indonesia's early warning system is still only going to catch about 80% of tsunamis. That kind of blew my mind, so I called up Mika McKinnon, a researcher, geophysicist, and all-around good explainer of disaster stuff.
Is there going to be another tsunami?
At some point, yes. There's already been a couple this year. Will it be generated by earthquakes or will it be generated by volcanoes? Well, yes. Over long enough time spans, both of those things are going to happen.
When it does happen, someone has to be watching. And in the future, it might be these guys.
Hey, guys.
Hey. I'm Sarah. Right now, they're college students studying geophysics. But in a few years, they may be the ones responsible for issuing the warnings.
I hope that from this disaster, the agency can improve their system, their method to mitigate this disaster.
You guys are the future geophysicists. What are you going to do differently?
Obviously, it's all about installing the advanced notice equipment, but also you have to drill the people.
Maybe we can use social media also.
You can use what?
Social media to inform people that there's a disaster coming.
Do you think that the government is doing a good job warning people who live along the coast?
You know that they are experienced with these kinds of disasters, but there's still things to improve.
They have done their best, and now it's our turn to do the rest.
The task of monitoring is complicated by Indonesia's geography. A nation of more than 17,000 islands has a massive coastline. Thousands and thousands of miles that are particularly vulnerable to nature's fury. Just 12 miles from the cafe where I met the students, people in this northern Jakarta neighborhood don't have the luxury of pondering the intricacies of their early warning system. They work on the water, harvesting green mussels.
Do you feel safe living so close to the coast?
Of course I'm afraid, but I have to live here because my job is here.
For many who make their living from the sea, geography decides their destiny. Moving further inland simply isn't an option.
Do you trust the government to tell you if a tsunami is coming?
I do, because they have the equipment.
But if the past is anything to go by, what they have may not be enough to warn people about the next tsunami, which in Indonesia is almost never as far away as one might hope.
Really interesting story there. All right, so we want to give you an update on the conflict in Syria, where it's not exactly mission accomplished. U.S. forces and their Kurdish allies have all but annihilated ISIS, but the fight isn't over yet. NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel is in northern Syria with more.
The battle against ISIS is now in its final stages, but it is taking a long time. There is only one pocket here in Syria that is still controlled by ISIS, the so-called Islamic State. And U.S.-backed Kurdish forces could clear that area out with some hard fighting, or American troops could destroy the area quite easily from the air. But this is why they don't want to do it. There are still thousands of people, women, children. Some of them are ISIS family members, some of them are ISIS supporters, others are just people who were caught up in the area and, according to Kurdish officials, being used as human shields. So what is happening now is the U.S.-backed Kurdish forces are trying to remove all of the civilians, try to separate them, question them, figure out who is who, and then once all of the women and children and people who want to leave that last ISIS pocket do leave, then the final offensive will begin, and we're told that will be a decisive offensive with a massive Kurdish ground offensive and U.S. airstrikes from above to finish off the last pocket of ISIS. But we've been told repeatedly that the Kurds and the Americans don't want to have the last operation against ISIS to turn out to be a massacre, which is why they're trying to clear out as many civilians as they can.
Thanks, Richard. Well, Gary Clark Jr. is a musician from Austin, Texas, and you might have heard of him from his song This Land, which gets right to the heart of racial tensions in the U.S. today. Lawrence Jackson sat down with the Grammy-winning artist ahead of his tour next month to discuss his music and artist's place in the culture wars.
Gary Clark Jr. is here. What's going on, brother?
Man, chilling.
You know, I've said to myself a few times, and I think a lot of young kids who at least are curious about music, you know, they say, I want to be a rock star. But at 12 years old, you actually sat down and picked up a book and self-taught yourself.
So I went to the library, rented 2 books. It shows you how to play A chord and E chord and, you know, all these things. So I just went and ran with that. Started putting chord progressions together and listening to the radio and watching the TV show called Austin City Limits and seeing Stevie Ray Vaughan play and seeing Jimmy Vaughan, Eric Clapton, and Buddy Guy, B.B. King, Robert Cray, Bonnie Raitt. I just sat there and recorded these tapes, you know, on VHS, just watch and try and figure it out.
50 acres and a Model A, right in the middle of Trump country.
Talk to me about the concept behind the video and the message for the song, This Land. Like, what are you trying to get across?
Yeah, well, you know, what the song was basically stems from is, you know, having an incident in 2018 out front of my house. You know, it's my safe space, and somebody comes up to me and starts talking all kinds of mess and just saying there's no way you could live here. There's, you know, you don't own this house, blah, 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 going on, and just making me feel like I'm not able to be here, you know. And it's not a big deal. You know, I'm strong. You know what I mean? But when this happened in front of my 3-year-old kid, I was like, I do not want this cycle to continue. I don't want him to have to deal with these things, and it made me upset. You know, instead of filtering this feeling, let me just go put it on record. You know what I mean? Because that's how I genuinely felt. And it made me think about being a child. And I remember the kids came by in a truck, some teenagers, you know, and that, you know, it's happened a couple of times where they would come by with the Confederate flag and, you know, call me out of my name. And I understand people are like, oh, this isn't, you know, it represents the South. Well, it's about the idea of this is not what I'm, no.
Talk to me about, you know, not just being a voice and a face in your genre, but also as a black man. And what do people react to when they come to a Gary Clark Jr. show?
It's amazing to be able to share this music with people of all walks of life. This music stuff is powerful, so to be a black man in 2019 playing bass roots music and it kind of resonate with everybody and bring everybody together, I feel like I'm in a blessed place, man. I'm in a great place, and so I'm not taking it for granted, man, and I'm going.
Well, that's our show for tonight. Thanks for watching. We will see you tomorrow.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.